veteran sold his custom-built chopper to fight for legal custody of his stepdaughter before her biological father could take her away. The motorcycle was his therapy during years of PTSD recovery. 2 weeks later, the thunderous roar of 200 motorcycles filled his quiet street.
This is Hammer and Tales. Let's get started.
Douglas Sullivan stood in his garage at 6 in the morning, just like he had every day for the past 3 years. The custom chopper sat silent in front of him, every piece of chrome gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He wasn't planning to ride it. He just needed to see the machine that had saved his life after losing everything that mattered. At 35, Douglas's scarred hands still knew every bolt on this bike. The custom paint job he'd spent months perfecting during the worst nights after Sharon's funeral. The extended forks he'd fabricated when he couldn't sleep, when grief and PTSD made rest impossible. This chopper hadn't just been built in his garage. It had been built from his need to create something beautiful after losing the love of his life. Douglas had been a combat engineer for 2 tours in Afghanistan before an IED blast changed everything. The explosion had taken his hearing in his left ear and filled his mind with images he couldn't shake. When he came home and met Sharon, she'd been a single mother struggling to raise her 7-year-old daughter Sophie alone after the girl's biological father had walked out. Sharon had seen past Douglas's invisible wounds to the man underneath. Douglas had seen a woman who deserved better than the deadbeat who'd abandoned her and a little girl who needed a real father. They'd built a family together, adding Chloe 3 years later, creating something Douglas had never thought he'd have after the war. Building this chopper had been his therapy after Sharon died in that car accident. Every late night in the garage, every custom part he'd crafted by hand, had been a step back toward being the father Sophie and Chloe needed. The bike represented 3 years of healing, 3 years of learning to live without Sharon while raising her daughters as his own. But Douglas didn't know that in just a few hours, he'd be forced to make a choice that would break his heart to save his family. "Dad, why are you out here so early?" Douglas turned to see 15-year-old Sophie standing in the doorway, already dressed for school. She'd started calling him Dad when she was 8, just months after he'd married her mother. The name had stuck, even after Sharon was gone, even though legally, Douglas had no claim to the girl who'd become his world. "Just checking on things, sweetheart." Sophie approached the bike carefully. She knew this machine was special to her father, even if she didn't fully understand why. It had been in the garage when tragedy struck their family, and somehow Douglas's late-night work sessions had helped him stay strong for both girls. "It's beautiful, Dad. You should ride it more often." "Maybe I will," Douglas said, though they both knew he rarely took the chopper out anymore. It had served its purpose. It had helped him heal enough to be the father they needed. Sophie hesitated at the doorway. "Dad, we need to talk. It's about the lawyer." They sat at Douglas's kitchen table, surrounded by legal paperwork that had become a constant presence since Brad Coleman had suddenly reappeared in their lives 6 months ago. Sophie's biological father had been gone for 8 years, but somehow he'd learned about Sharon's death and decided he wanted his daughter back. "Mr. Peterson called yesterday," Sophie said, her voice steady despite the fear Douglas could see in her eyes. "Brad's lawyer filed another motion. They're pushing for an emergency custody hearing." Douglas felt his stomach drop. Brad Coleman was a disaster of a human being. Drug arrests, domestic violence charges, unemployment stretching back years. But he was Sophie's biological father, and the family court system often favored blood relations over stability. "What did Peterson say about our chances?" "That's the problem. Brad's claiming you're an unfit guardian because of your PTSD. His lawyer is arguing that Sophie should be with her a real family instead of a damaged veteran." The words hit Douglas like shrapnel. His PTSD was managed, under control, had never interfered with his parenting. But Brad's lawyer was painting a picture of an unstable veteran who couldn't properly care for children. "The adoption would stop all of this," Sophie continued. "If you legally adopt me, Brad loses all parental rights, but it costs money we don't have." Sophie nodded miserably. 25,000 for the legal fight, the home study, all the court costs. Mr. Peterson says Brad's going to contest everything, make it as expensive as possible. Douglas looked out the window at 12-year-old Chloe in the backyard, throwing a ball for their dog. She had no idea that her sister might be taken away by a man who'd never shown any interest in being a father until Sharon's life insurance money was mentioned in court documents. His eyes drifted to the garage where the chopper waited. A custom-built bike in perfect condition would bring 25,000 from the right collector. Maybe more. Enough for the legal fees. Enough to make Sophie legally and permanently his daughter, safe from a biological father who saw her as a paycheck rather than a person. "I already lost your mother," Douglas said quietly. "I'm not about to lose you, too." Sophie's head snapped up. "Dad, what are you saying?" "Let me make some calls, see what options we have." But Douglas already knew there was only one option that would work, and it would cost him the machine that had rebuilt his soul. That evening, Douglas sat alone in the garage with the decision he didn't want to make. He opened the chopper's storage compartment and found what he was looking for. A folded piece of paper he'd written during his darkest days, a promise to himself that he'd hidden there during the bike's construction. "If you're reading this," it said in his own handwriting, "it means you finished what you started. You built something beautiful from the wreckage. You found your way back to being the father they need. The bike did its job. Now it's time to let it help protect your family. The best parts of healing aren't in this machine. They're in your heart, where they'll always be." Douglas folded the note carefully. He'd written it during a moment of clarity 2 years ago, knowing someday he might need the reminder. The chopper had saved him, but his daughter needed saving now. Douglas picked up his phone and dialed. "Rodriguez Custom Motorcycles? This is Douglas Sullivan. I've got a custom chopper I need to sell." What Douglas didn't realize was that his sacrifice was about to ripple through a community he never knew existed. The next morning, Douglas took the chopper for one last ride, through the neighborhoods where he'd tested every modification, past the school where Sophie and Chloe learned and laughed and built the normal childhood he'd fought to give them, down the country road where he'd first felt free from the weight of war and loss. When he returned, Douglas spent an hour polishing chrome that was already perfect, saying goodbye to 3 years of healing. Rodriguez Custom Motorcycles sat on the edge of town, a shop known throughout 3 states for quality work and fair dealing. Carlos Rodriguez was a former Marine who understood that every custom bike had a story. "That's an incredible chopper," Carlos said, admiring the bike. "Don't see craftsmanship like this often. Built every piece myself. Took me 3 years." Carlos walked around the bike, noting details that would matter to collectors. "Mind if I ask why you're selling?" Douglas hesitated. The truth felt too raw, but something about Carlos's respectful manner made him open up. "My stepdaughter's biological father is trying to take her away. This is the only thing I own worth enough to fight him in court." Carlos nodded, without judgment. He'd heard similar stories before, understood the weight of decisions that brought people to his shop. "Let me make some calls. I might have a collector interested." While Carlos worked the phones, a younger man with grease under his fingernails approached the chopper. He introduced himself as Jake. "Sir, is this your bike?" "It was," Douglas replied. "Just sold her." Jake studied Douglas's face with the attention of someone who understood loss. "You don't look like a man who wanted to sell. Want and need aren't always the same thing. What's the story, if you don't mind me asking?" Douglas found himself explaining about Sophie, about Brad Coleman's sudden reappearance, about a legal system that sometimes protected the wrong people. Jake listened with the focused attention of someone who understood that families could be built rather than born. "How long have you been her father?" 8 years. Since she was 7. And now some deadbeat who walked away wants her back. His lawyer says I'm just the stepfather. That blood matters more than who raised her." Jake nodded slowly, filing away information that would soon matter more than either man realized. That's a load of garbage. Real fathers are the ones who show up every day. Carlos returned with paperwork and good news. $27,000, enough for the legal fees with money left over for Sophie's first semester at college. Douglas signed the papers with hands that wanted to shake, took the check that represented his daughter's future, and walked away from the bike that had carried him through the hardest years of his life. That evening, Douglas sat in his empty garage. His tools hung in their places, but the space where the chopper had lived for 3 years was now just an empty concrete pad. Sophie found him there when the girls came home from school. "Dad, where's your motorcycle?" "I had to sell it, sweetheart, but I got enough money to make you officially my daughter." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "You sold your bike for me?" Douglas pulled her into a hug. "Best investment I ever made. But that bike was special to you. It helped you after Mom died." "You're more special," Douglas said simply. "You and Chloe both." Chloe joined the hug, and for a moment they stood there in the empty garage, a family bound by choice rather than blood, facing down people who thought genetics mattered more than love. But Douglas had no idea that his sacrifice was about to ripple through a community he never knew existed. Jake couldn't stop thinking about the veteran at Rodriguez's shop. That quiet dignity, the way Douglas had signed those papers like he was surrendering part of his soul to protect his daughter, stuck with Jake through his shift at the Veterans Center where he counseled other former service members. That evening, Jake logged onto the Veterans MC Forum, a gathering place for military riders across 3 states who shared stories, advice, and support for brothers in need. His post was simple. "Brothers, I met a combat engineer today who sold his custom chopper to fight for custody of his stepdaughter. Afghanistan veteran, built the bike during PTSD recovery after losing his wife took him 3 years. Had to choose between his healing and protecting his daughter from a deadbeat bio father who wants her back. Thought you should know what a real warrior looks like." The responses came immediately. "That's a soldier who understands what matters." "What's his story? Can we help?" "Post details. We take care of our own." Jake shared what he knew about Douglas, about Sophie's situation, about a father's impossible choice between his therapy and his family's safety. Within hours, the post had spread to dozens of forums. Iron Eagles MC, Rolling Thunder, Combat Veterans Motorcycle Association, Disabled American Veterans Riding Groups. Each group added their own layer of respect and determination. This was about a veteran's sacrifice, a father's love, a family under attack from someone who'd abandoned them. This was about values every rider understood: loyalty, sacrifice, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. Chapter presidents started making calls. Fundraising coordinators checked their emergency accounts. Custom builders began searching for chopper parts that could create something extraordinary. What started as one man's simple post was becoming a movement that would change Douglas's life in ways he never imagined. 2 weeks after selling the chopper, Douglas was in his backyard helping Chloe with her math homework when he heard the first engine. A low rumble from somewhere down the street, followed by another, then another. Douglas straightened up, his mechanic's ear recognizing multiple motorcycle engines approaching. The sound grew louder, deeper, like thunder rolling toward his house. "Dad, what's that noise?" Chloe asked, looking up from her textbook. Douglas walked toward his front yard, the rumble becoming impossibly loud. He reached the sidewalk just as the first motorcycle turned onto his quiet street. Then the second, then 10 more. Then so many he stopped counting. The lead rider pulled into Douglas's driveway and shut off his engine. The sudden silence felt overwhelming after the roar that had filled the air. Behind him, motorcycles lined both sides of the street as far as Douglas could see. Riders of every age, from young veterans to graying bikers, men and women, all watching Douglas with expressions of respect and determination. Neighbors emerged from their houses, some clutching phones to record what was happening. Mrs. Peterson from next door stood on her porch with tears already streaming down her face. The lead rider removed his helmet and approached Douglas. "Are you Douglas Sullivan?" I am. My name's Jake. We met at Rodriguez's shop 2 weeks ago. You sold your chopper to fight for your daughter. Douglas nodded, confused but not afraid. These people didn't feel like a threat. They felt like something else entirely. Mr. Sullivan, word of what you did has spread through the veteran riding community. From here to Colorado, from Texas to Michigan. Riders have been talking about the combat engineer who chose family over his healing machine. Jake gestured to the crowd that now filled Douglas's street. These people came because they understand sacrifice. They understand that real fathers are the ones who fight for their children. And they understand that a man who makes your choice deserves better than an empty garage. A flatbed trailer pulled up behind the last row of motorcycles. On it, covered by a tarp, sat the unmistakable silhouette of a motorcycle. Mr. Sullivan, the riding community would like to return something that was taken from you. Not your bike, but something even better. Jake signaled to several riders, who moved to the trailer and began untying the tarp. This is a custom chopper built from the ground up by master fabricators from 6 different states. They pulled away the covering, revealing a motorcycle that gleamed in the afternoon sun. Every piece of chrome was perfect, every curve flawless. But as Douglas moved closer, he saw custom details that made his knees weak. Engraved in flowing script on the tank, Sophie's dad. A small brass plaque mounted below the speedometer. For Douglas, Sophie, and Chloe, real family always wins. Custom metalwork depicting scenes of fathers and daughters. And mounted on the back, 2 small seats sized for passengers. Douglas's vision blurred as he traced Sophie's name with his finger. The frame was built by Tommy Rodriguez in Denver, Jake continued. Paint job by Sharon Chen in Phoenix. Custom work by the Martinez brothers in Detroit. Every person who touched this bike knew they were building something sacred. Sophie and Chloe appeared at Douglas's side, drawn by the crowd and the beautiful machine. "Dad, is this yours?" Sophie asked in amazement. Douglas couldn't speak. He knelt and pulled both girls into his arms, all 3 staring at the motorcycle that somehow captured everything he thought was lost forever. Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "There's one more thing. The riding community took up a collection, enough to cover all your legal fees, plus Sophie's college tuition for 4 years, with money left over for whatever else your family might need." Douglas found his voice. "I can't accept this. This is too much." "Mr. Sullivan, you gave up everything for family. That's what real soldiers do. That's what real fathers do. This isn't charity. This is brotherhood." An older veteran in leather riding gear stepped forward. "Douglas, I lost my daughter to her biological father in a custody battle 15 years ago. When I heard your story, I knew she would have wanted to be part of this." A young woman with military insignia on her vest approached. "Sir, I'm stationed at Fort Carson. When the female veterans riding group heard about a fellow soldier who sacrificed for family, we could not help." One by one, riders shared their reasons for being there. Some had lost children to unfit biological parents. Others had found family through love rather than blood. All of them understood that Douglas's choice represented something bigger than one man's sacrifice. "Dad," Sophie whispered, "can we ride it?" Douglas looked at his daughters, then at the crowd of people who had traveled hundreds of miles to restore what he thought was gone forever. "Would you like to?" Both girls nodded eagerly as Douglas helped them onto the bike, Sophie in front of him and Chloe behind, just like a real family ride. The engine started with a perfect rumble, and 3 years of healing guided his hands to the controls. As they pulled out of the driveway, 200 motorcycles started their engines in perfect synchronization. The sound was overwhelming, beautiful, like thunder celebrating love and sacrifice and the bonds that connect strangers who understand what really matters. Douglas rode slowly through the neighborhood, his daughters laughing with pure joy around him, surrounded by riders who had turned his quiet street into a parade of chrome and community. Behind them, neighbors lined the sidewalks, many crying, all witnessing something that would be talked about in their town for years to come. When they returned to the house, the writers began to disperse, but not before each one approached Douglas personally. Handshakes, hugs, stories shared between people who understood that healing meant helping others heal. Jake was the last to leave. "Douglas, there's something else. Your original bike, the one you sold." Carlos tracked it down. "The buyer was a collector in California who heard your story. He's shipping it back, said it belongs with you. You'll have both bikes." As the sun set over their street, Douglas sat in his garage, no longer empty but filled with 2 motorcycles and the echo of 200 engines celebrating family. Sophie sat on Sophie's dad, reading her acceptance letter to community college, while Chloe hung her new helmet next to Douglas's on the workbench. On the refrigerator, Chloe had taped a new drawing. It showed a man and 2 girls on a motorcycle, with the words "Forever Family" written in careful letters underneath. "That's you and me and Sophie," Chloe explained. "Now Sophie's really our sister." Douglas pulled both his daughters close, understanding finally that his note had been right. The best parts of healing had never been in the bike or the roads. They were in the love that connected people, the community that formed around shared values, and the knowledge that sacrificing for family was never really a loss. Douglas started Sophie's dad one more time just to hear her purr. Tomorrow he would call Mr. Peterson with the good news that they could fight Brad Coleman with the best legal team money could buy. The custody battle would be won, Sophie would officially become his daughter, and no deadbeat biological father would ever threaten their family again. The garage was full again, but more importantly, so was Douglas's heart. He'd learned that real fathers were the ones who showed up every day, and real families were built on love rather than biology. And when you fought for family, sometimes the whole world fought with you.
Liked hearing this one? Hit that like button and subscribe to Hammer and Tales for more. Check out the next story on your screen. It's a good one. See you next time.